Today we're going to make a fruit pie using short crust pastry. We're also going to be using seasonal fruits, and some of the fruits that I'm using have actually been foraged. Going back first of all to the pie itself, you can use a variety of dishes. We have here a traditional pie dish. It's made from metal, but we also have got here a flan dish. It will go in the oven, it's porcelain. That could be used just as easily, or you might have got a traditional pie plate. This is an enamel one. That it's not very deep, but it will still take a surprising amount of fruit. You could use that, or you could actually use just a cake or sandwich tin, and that would work just as well. But we're going to make the pastry, and obviously the amount of pastry you need is going to be determined by the size of the plate that you've got. I'm going to make 200 grams of pastry. That means I'm going to be using 200 grams of flour and 100 grams of butter. That is what we call 100 grams of pastry. It's the flour measurement, not the combined weight. So 100 grams of pastry would use 100 grams of plain flour. That would be enough to make a pie, top and bottom, in a plate about this size, which is about 7 inches across. What's that? About 27 and 7 is 14. Put about 20 centimetres across, something like that. If your pie plate's bigger, double it. So here we go, we've got a sieve. I'm going to sieve the flour, not because it might have lumps in it, but because it aerates the flour and it will make your pastry nice and light. So that goes through the sieve. In school, we've got the sieves to hand. Remember to use them. There we go. So that's the flour gone in, and now I've got 100 grams here of butter, and it's all been chopped up, and we're going to rub it in until it looks like breadcrumbs. There's different ways of doing this. One is to rub like I'm doing now, my fingers being rubbed across with my thumbs like this, and you're sort of stroking it, but you always must be picking up the flour from underneath. If you pick on one little bit of fat and you keep working on it, what's going to happen is it's going to melt and it's going to stick your flour and your butter together, and you really don't want that. Water is used to bind it, and if we don't get any water in, the pastry is going to be just about impossible to handle, and once it's baked it's going to crumble and collapse. So you're making the job extremely hard for yourself if you make it stick together at this point. It's what we call oiling. So when you think it's done, give it a shake, and it's quite obviously not done in this case. We have a few very big, that's my oven heating. We've got some, there we go, rather large lumps there, so I am going to just get rid of those very quickly. Picking it up, lifting it out of the bowl, not up here because you're going to get it all over the place, but just lifting it up to aerate it against, because once you put it in the oven, it's going to be nice light pastry if it's got lots of air in it. Right, that looks to me like I can actually carry on. It could go a little bit further, but the risk of it oiling and me needing no water to bind it are increasing. So I need to put in 2, 3, 4. Keep going with that, and you put in 1 teaspoon for every 25 grams of water. Just keep going, don't add it bit at a time mixing, because you'll get blisters in the pastry. And have a look at it when you think, is that going to bind together? Just test it. I think it needs perhaps another one. Add 1 more in. So it's a 5 milliliter spoon of water full to the brim for every 25 grams of flour that you are using. Mix it in with either a palette knife or an ordinary table knife, not a sharp knife, and then see if we can get it together in one hand. Just bring the crumbs together, squash the crumbs together like that, and you should end up with a ball of pastry. There. Now we don't want to handle this pastry too roughly, so get it into a ball just right. If you handle it too roughly, what's going to happen is you'll develop the gluten in the pastry, and if you develop the gluten, the protein in the flour, then it will start to get very, very tough, your pastry. Wrap that up, cover it, and just pop it into the fridge until you are ready for it. So, there we go. I'll just put it over there for now. Okay, before we go on and do the fruit, I need to have a cloth and I need to wipe this down. So let's get rid of all the remnants of the pastry before we carry on and look at fruit. So fillings of, there we go, let's put this over here. This hot soapy cloth. There. Now, fruit. I'm just going to make an apple and blackberry crumble. The apple, plenty of them around. This is a cooking apple. Cooking apples, things like Bramley apples, and when you cook these, they fall, they mush, they go very, very soft, and that's what we call falling. Eating apples won't fall, they don't cook properly. So try and use a cooking apple. You could use pear, you could use plum, you could use gooseberries, you could use rhubarb, but if it's a very, very watery kind of fruit that you're using, you might need to add a little bit of corn flour once you put it into the pie, but I will talk about that later. So this big apple, let us peel it first. Peel it with the speed peeler. As we're peeling it, we're opening the cells to the oxygen, and a reaction will take place with something called polyphenol oxidase, which is an enzyme. The polyphenol oxidase will make the apple go browner much more quickly than it would normally do. It will go brown anyway, but any windfalls that are damaged and the oxygen can get in, or any fruit that has been cut, is likely to go brown because of the action of enzymes that are found naturally in the fruit. So we have to work very quickly. You can, whoops daisy, you can coat it in lemon juice, but the problem with that is you can get the taste of the lemon juice, you might not want it. So we just work quickly, and you prepare apples and other fruit just before you need them. So that's now going to go into composting. There we go. And we're going to use the apple corer. Down onto the board. Out it comes. And as you can see on the back, look, I've missed it slightly. It's obviously a little bit wonky, so I'll go in again. But whatever you do, you put this down on the board. You never use an apple corer in your hand doing it like this. If you slip, it will go right through your hand. So, there's some. Now, I'm going to cut this up. If you're going to stew the fruit first, before you make the pie, it's great. The problem in school is we don't really have enough time to do that, because you have to stew the fruit, and then you have to let it go stone cold before you can put it in the pastry, because otherwise the pastry is going to go soggy. And while you're decorating your pie is going to be literally sort of going soft and collapsing in front of your eyes because of the heat of the filling. So, if I was stewing fruit, I'd cut it into pieces this big, but I'm not going to be stewing this, so what I am going to do is cut it very small. Then I can get lots of apple into my pie. So there's the apple. Little bits can have little bits of skin. I'm just going to leave on because it's extra fibre and it's actually where the vitamins are. They're just underneath the skin. So there's my apple. If you wish to sweeten the apple, it's a good idea just to get a bowl and sweeten them at this stage rather than sweetening them later. So I've got some sugar here. There we go, there's a bowl. And I'm going to better get a spoon for that, I think. I'm going to take a bit of fruit. You can see how the enzymes are reacting now. Just put a little bit of sugar on it. I don't want to over sweeten this. And a little bit more on. Saves you putting the sugar on last. If you put your sugar on last, and you get a thick layer of it underneath your pastry doesn't actually cook particularly well. There, I think I need to buy a container for my sugar. There we go, pop it in the cupboard. Good, so that's the sweetened apple waiting, and then these are my washed, cleaned blackberries. I've been foraging for these outside. They're great, but remember, as always, pick them from high up on the bush. We know what doggies do low down on the bush, so make sure that they are, and just give them a quick rinse. And that's my fruit filling. Okay. Now I've just got the pastry out of the fridge, and I'm now going to line the dish. So there's the pastry. I've got to get a top and a bottom out of that, so I'm going to cut it in half and just put half to one side. Then get some flour down on an area that is clean. You've got flour dredgers in school that we can use, but I don't have that at home. So here we go. Put a little bit of flour down, put some flour on the rolling pin, my fingers, and roll. I'm trying to roll a circle. So turn it, roll it. Ignore any of these cracks that are coming up. Roll, turn, and can you notice that I'm moving it around the table each time I'm rolling it and turning it to prevent it from sticking to the table. If it starts to stick to the rolling pin, or if you get pastry on the rolling pin, just stop, take the pastry off. Now it's getting so big I have to do 3 little rolls and a turn. Turn it round and do 3 little rolls and a turn. Don't get unduly worried if it starts to crack. Don't, whatever you do, scrunch it up because you see a patch like that. Just ignore it. Just keep turning it round. The turning is the most important bit. We do not want it hammered and stuck into the table. Put your plate on the top, and it should be the diameter of the plate plus the sides, and that looks roughly big enough. Now, there's lots of ways of lifting pastry. The most common one is on the rolling pin like that. Then roll it over. If it's a small piece, you can usually just pick it up if you've rolled it properly. Now, with your fingers, this is why you can't have long nails when you are cooking, because you will go through the pastry. Just gently ease it down. We ease down, and the reason for that is that if you pull it out and you push your finger into it, you're going to stretch the gluten strands. When it's cooked, the gluten strands will go hard, they'll coagulate, and they will shrink back, and your pastry will be shrunken from the sides. So we're getting the air out there. Any air that's underneath, just gently, if you don't trust yourself, or if your fingernails are a bit big, get a piece of pastry and just hold the piece of pastry and do that with the piece of pastry. So there's no air in there. Flatten it. Now at this point, we can put our fruit in. This is our sugared fruit. Is going into the pastry. That's quite a lot. Here we are. I always, if I'm using something like rhubarb, which is, or all berries, all raspberries, all blackberries, or if I'm using something like gooseberries that create a lot of water, a lot of moisture when you cook them, I often put just a tablespoonful of corn flour sprinkled over the top, and the starch in the corn flour will gelatinize, and when it does that, it's absorbing the liquid so that hopefully the pie won't be too soggy. And then we can move back, let's move that well out of the way, a little bit more flour down, a second piece, and we roll and we turn and we roll and we turn. Flour on the rolling pin, roll, turn, roll, turn, roll, turn. And we're looking for a piece this time that is big enough to go over the top of that pastry. There. Like if you're doing, you know, the ingredients in the pastry are actually quite cheap. Oh, see, it tore there a little bit. Don't worry about it. Just pop it back and keep going. And we're trying to roll it, whoops-a-daisy, to cover the top of that pie. If you're doing a very big pie, because the ingredients are cheap, it might be a good idea to make quite a bit of pastry. And then any excess you can use for, say, jam tarts. So now I've got a beaten egg here. You can use water for this point, but because I've got a beaten egg here, I'm going to use this on a pastry brush and just take it around the outside. It's going to seal the edge nicely when the proteins coagulate when they set, it will seal the pastry. That's the advantage of using it over water. But pastry on the top and easing in again, not out, easing in, and squashing the two edges together. That's what we do. So we get it sealed. When that's done, hold the pie in one hand, hold your knife angled so that your hand is underneath the pie. Again, the reason for that is if you cut it the other way, your pastry will shrink and you will not have a nice pie edge. There we go. So it's been trimmed off now. Move those to one side. At this point, make sure it's completely sealed. Lots of things you can do with the edge to seal it. You can use the knife, and that's what we call knocking back the edges, or you can use a finger and a thumb, finger, thumb, finger, thumb, finger, thumb, and you twist, and that's the most common kind of pie edge. There are other kinds. You can cut like this and then fold that over and squash it down to make like a star edge. Not a great fan of that one. You do the next one and it makes a sort of sun edge, but I don't particularly like that. You can see it's fiddly. You go all the way round like that. Like I say, we'll just do the thumb edge, get rid of that. Or you can make leaves and put leaves around the pie and put them around the pie edge. I'm just going to put some leaves and decorate it. Traditionally, the purists will say you don't ever decorate a fruit pie, a sweet pie. You only ever decorate, funnily enough, the savoury pies, the steak and kidney pies. They're the ones that the purists would say should be decorated. However, traditions like that are dying rapidly and it doesn't seem to matter now, and they do look nice if you can decorate them. So here we go. This is the little bits of pastry that I'm rolling out now. Get it nice and thin, and then we're going to very quickly just cut some leaves. Now obviously if you have, very gently with this so you don't cut the table, if you don't have a cutter, you can use a knife like this. Just take it through the pastry so you've got a strip, and then cut diamonds, and each of those diamonds can be turned into a leaf. And when you put them on the pie, let's glaze the pie. Again, the proteins in the egg are going to make the pie go nice and shiny in the oven. So here we go. Let's take it right round. There we are, down the sides, down the edges. Let's do that. And then let's stick on some of these little leaves. There's all sorts of things you can do. Whoops, a daisy's escaped. There's all sorts of things you can do to make the pie pretty. But we're going to put a little hole in the middle just to let out any air and any steam when it goes into the oven. So you can play around, decorate it to your heart's content. As long as you've been quick in the first part of the making process, you'll have time to do that. But if you faff about at the beginning of the lesson, you will not have time to do that. And then we're going to put that into the oven. So I really need to find my oven gloves. Here they are. Whoops, a daisy. To get those out. I've got flour all over them. And we're going to put that into the oven. Look at this. Onto a baking tray. And that will cook for about half an hour. After 15 minutes, I will check that the pastry isn't going too brown. If it is, I will move it lower in the oven where it's a little bit cooler, and it shouldn't then overcook on the top. But we do have to cook it for long enough to cook the fruit filling. So it will take about half an hour in the oven. If you cook the fruit filling and you put it in cooked, it makes it much quicker to cook the pastry. It's easier in many ways. Cooked. Just have a little look at it just to test, just to check that the, oh, it's nice and soft, so the fruit is cooked. You can see at this point when it comes out of the oven, just a little bit of sugar on the top. And there we have one fruit pie. It's just one little area of interest, and that's where I messed about with it, showing you different edgings. And in the messing about with it, I clearly stretched the pastry a little bit, and you can probably see there where it has started to shrink from the edges of the tin, and that's because I was stretching it, I was playing around with it. There. Now I can try and cut a piece and put it on the plate. It's a little bit hot for this, but let's have a look and see. Cut down, the pastry is nice and tender. It's not easy to cut it when it's hot. Let's just go right through at the bottom. You can see the nice colours. I don't know whether this is going to help. There we go. To pull out, ooh, slice of pie, not very well done, but you can see from the inside there that the fruit is cooked. And I think a teaspoon to try it. There we go. It's cooked right to the bottom because I had it on a baking tray. Really good. Really nice. And that's your fruit pie.